Welcome, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor for me to introduce this lecture today. In fact, not the lecture, but the idea of the series. We have an agreement with the King Faisal Prize that from amongst the laureates, we would always have one of them give a lecture at the center. It started uh, last year or the year before, and I'm pleased that Professor Robert Hillenbrand, who gave that lecture, is with us, and indeed, as the other laureate, Professor Carol Hillenbrand, is also with us. And so we are delighted that Professor Musawi, you could join us today. My role really was just to mention that how honored we are to have this series of King Faisal lectures and how grateful we are to the King Faisal Prize and its Secretary General, Dr. Abdulaziz Al-Subail, who is with us. Welcome. And I would now invite Professor Kutubuddin, who will be introducing our speaker before Professor Musawi.
Good evening, everyone. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Tahira Qutbuddin. I think I see some familiar faces here. Welcome to all friends and new. I'm the Laureate Professor of Arabic, Al-Babtain Laureate Professor of Arabic in the Department of Asian Middle Eastern Studies. And it is my distinct pleasure and honor to introduce to you Professor Mohsen Al-Musawi, and to welcome you to the OSIS King Faisal lecture. So this evening we are privileged to host one of the most accomplished and influential scholars of Arabic literature working today. Professor Mohsen Al-Musawi is the King Faisal Prize Laureate and Professor of Arabic and Comparative Literature at Columbia University. Professor Musawi's illustrious career spans continents, decades, and virtually every major domain of Arabic literary studies. He has taught for more than 20 years at leading universities across the Middle East, including in Tunisia, Yemen, Jordan, Iraq, and the UAE. He joined Columbia University in 2002, where he continues to shape the field as one of its most authoritative voices. His academic journey begins significantly with a PhD from Columbia University itself, and this marks the beginning of a relationship with the institution that has come full circle. Professor Musawi is a renowned scholar, literary critic, and cultural historian, and he is the author of nearly 40 books, including several novels, and over 70 scholarly articles in both Arabic and English. His research and teaching span classical and modern Arabic literature, comparative studies, cultural criticism, and the global circulation of Arabic texts. His scholarship has illuminated subjects ranging from Arabic poetic modernity to the post-colonial Arabic novel, from cultural memory and intellectual history to the vast and enduring universe of the Thousand and One Nights. Few scholars have contributed as profoundly to our understanding of Alf Layla wa Layla. His works include Shahrazad in England, The Society of the Thousand and One Nights, The Islamic Context of the Thousand and One Nights, and The Arabian Nights in contemporary world cultures. And these have reshaped the field in understanding textual, cultural, and global afterlives of this foundational work. Professor Musawi is also an editor of tremendous influence. Since 2000, he has served as the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Arabic Literature, which is the foremost academic journal in the field. In this role, he has helped shape the direction of Arabic literary scholarship worldwide and mentored generations of emerging scholars. Beyond his scholarly publications, Professor Musawi has served in significant academic and cultural leadership roles. As consultant to major institutions in the United States, Europe, and the Middle East, as chair of multiple departments, as a board member and advisor to international research institutes, and as an evaluator for leading academic bodies. His early work, directing one of Iraq's largest cultural and translation programs, remains a landmark in the history of modern Arabic intellectual life. Professor Musawi's achievements have been recognized through numerous prestigious awards, including the Owais Award in Literary Criticism, the Kuwait Prize in Arabic Language and Literature, the Sheikh Zayed Book Award in 2022, and most notably, the King Faisal Prize for Arabic Literature in English in 2022 also. This evening's lecture draws on a celebrated book, The Medieval Islamic Republic of Letters, Arabic Knowledge Construction, a groundbreaking study that re-examines the intellectual networks, textual practices, and cultural systems that shaped the production of knowledge in the medieval Islamic world. Professor Musawi's work challenges us to recognize how deeply interconnected, intellectually vibrant, and globally resonant the world was, and how its legacies continue to speak to our present moment. It's a rare privilege to have with us a scholar whose breadth of knowledge, depth of intellect, and generosity of spirit have enriched our field so profoundly. Please join me in welcoming Professor Mohsen Jassim Al-Musawi.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Rohan, and thank you, Dr. Qutbuddin, and thank you, Dr. Abdulaziz, for making this possible. The talk for today is would refer, as Professor Qutbuddin is telling you, to my book, which appeared in 2015, The Medieval Islamic Republic of Letters, The Construction of Knowledge in Arabic, or the Arabic Knowledge Construction, and so on. The book at that time certainly raised very good reviews and very positive ones too. And some of them certainly didn't know what I am talking about. It is not only debunking the myth, which has been repeated certainly by Arab intellectuals, even the Nahda intellectuals around that time, that there are dark ages, and they divided history according to that kind of periodization. That is, there is actually a dark period in the history of Arabic literature and Arabic culture, generally speaking, and the whole Islamic world. The misunderstanding came because it is almost a reflex of what the European themselves did in the Enlightenment. In the Enlightenment, certainly, and we know that Goethe, what he wrote about the Middle Ages in Europe, these were their dark ages for them, and so on. So Arab intellectuals took it also from some Orientalized views, and they began to reflect on that. So what I am arguing here is different altogether, is that what we have, I mean, you know, I changed I thought that I'll read to you, but later on I thought maybe it is better to talk, and so on. So what I am arguing here, there are actually grids that is of communication, which has been very powerful throughout that period, from the 12th to the 19th century. So that period. And these kind of grids took very many forms. For instance, you talk about a book and you think that grammar doesn't have anything to do with what we call the medieval Islamic Republic of Letters. But if you read Ibn Wahb al-Katib, for instance, in the 10th century, and his book, Al-Burhan, you try to see the reflection in the 13th century, when Sakkaki, for instance, wrote his Miftah. And you read what happened also in Taftazan and very many other places, when you find that Taftazani will be writing something about that is Al-Maqdisi will be writing about that, Al-Qazwini will be writing, Al-Iji will be writing about that. We are talking about different locations in which everybody will be picking up on that book, and they write either abridgments or something else, that is how to elaborate on these books and so on Miftah. grammar itself is being taken from its limited kind of understanding, grammaticality, and leading it into something larger, which relates to logic and philosophy, generally speaking. And as such, it is given a wider conceptualization than what has been done usually early on. That is one issue. The other issue is who are the people we are talking about along that period? The people, we are talking about people from different parts right now. And all these people corresponding with each other. Right now, we are very happy with ourselves, thinking that since we have the internet and so on, we can communicate with each other. But if you look at the network around that time, you will be surprised. You will be surprised that somebody in Aleppo will be writing, and somebody somewhere in Maro, for instance, Marv that is, or in Samarkand will be responding, and so on. So look at the web we are talking about, and you might be surprised, how is it possible? Certainly there are routes which you know, that is, for instance, Hajj, and they take their way to through Cairo, and they settle there sometimes for months, years, and so on and so on. That is also very important something. And certainly you know what Jawaharlal Nehru wrote about Ibn Battuta, for instance, when he tried to describe travels and so on. And he said that is the unique traveler in all ages and so on. So we have also people who travel from one place to another, and they connect. And definitely they have something to say about that. More important to us, and that will lead me to the description itself, why the Republic of Letters and so on, is first of all Cairo. People will miss the understanding that since Baghdad, for instance, was fell to the Mongols around that time in 2058. So the center, and this is what Ibn Daqmaq will tell you, that the universe remained without a caliph. So the universe, with the fall of the caliphate, the universe is left without a caliph. That was a shock for very many intellectuals, historians, jurists, and so on and so on. And they people began to confuse the two things, that is the political side of things with the other thing, the cultural. They are not going on the same lines. Sometimes you see that there are political upheavals here, but at the same time you find that there is a cultural revival somewhere else, so on. Now, that is another thing. The question which is being raised always also, but I explain it certainly, is the Republic of Letters itself. Is it a kind of indigenous phrasing to Arabic or Islamic culture, generally speaking? It is actually, if you go to the understanding of the word Jamhara, whether you are talking about Ibn Durayd or others, how they usually reference that and how they talk and what do they mean. It means a collection of a lot of material which is also corresponding with each other. If you go to Ibn Qutayba, that we are talking about Uyun al-Akhbar or Sha'r wa-Shu'ara, and you will understand that this is how they understand culture. It is like a feast where everybody is participating with something. So that is something beautiful in here. However, if you go lexically speaking and grammatically, and they try to go to Ibn Mandur or to Taj al-Arus, for instance, Zabidi, and so on, and try to see exactly Jamhar, how does it work from Jamhara, and so on. It works both ways. That is, there is a unity and a gathering, but also there is a dispersion. And that is the beauty of the Arabic certainly itself. That is to say, there is always the word, its meaning, and its opposite in the same word itself. So working this way, it gives you the sense of Arabic. It's as a language which is very rich, and that will take me to the other issue before elaborating more on the Republic. Arabic itself has been not only because it is the language of the Quran and everywhere in the Islamic world, that is true, very true, certainly, But at the same time, it has been a field for rhetoric. And you find that the amount of work which was done by Islamic thinkers all over the globe, the Islamic region, generally speaking, that is, they write, for instance, something 5 books in Persian, but 10 books in Arabic. And that, if you look at them, whether we are talking about Al-Sharif, Al-Jurjani, for instance, Al-Tiftazani, Iji, and so on, and very many names, certainly, you will be surprised how they author their books in Arabic and so on. So the conversation is there, actually, and we need to understand that, especially if we go to what is called the Badi'iyya tradition in poetry, because you find that Ali Ahmed Azad, for instance, writing in that tradition with a beautiful also appendix in grammatical and rhetorical terms and so on. And he was living in India and so on. So that is Bilgrami. Ali Azad Bilgrami. And he wrote beautifully about poetry, certainly in Arabic, and at the same time, certainly writing something, as I told you, about balagha and so on, about rhetoric, generally speaking. Now, why? Yes, okay. If you agree with me and that there is a route for the explanation of Arabic, that is Jemhara and Jumhuriya, that is Republic, for instance, then what is the reason of bringing this back? It is bringing it back because Casanova, Pascal, that is, wrote a book, which is a very good book, certainly. I mean, I am not disputing that, but I'm differing, certainly, insofar as the conceptualization of the Republic. Here, she said, I mean, the title of her book is The Word of Republic of Letters. Yeah, that is quite a title. It is very captivating as a title, but look at the argument, and she will suggest that from the 15th century to the 19th, that is throughout the 18th century, that is Paris has been the center of the world. And for that matter, because it has this power of being centripetal and centrifugal at the same time. So it is expanding, like the sun, certainly, and shining, but at the same time, it is inviting everybody. Okay, why don't we say the same thing about Cairo? We are talking about Cairo since the Fatimids, certainly, and let us say from the mid-10th century until almost the end of the 15th century, Cairo was the center for everybody, actually. And this is why the writing, the people who stayed there, you will be surprised. When Ibn Khaldun tried to talk about that, he said it is the garden of the world. This is how he described Cairo at that time, because he said that everybody was there. Everybody, every book is there available for you. The copy is certainly a flourishing industry. And that will bring us to Anderson, because his argument that actually culture is associated with the print. And the idea of communities and so on are formed under the impact of print, and he associated that, as some of you might know, with the newspapers and so on and so on. And that will take us to a different track, because right now, what are we going to say about the new social media and so on and so on? That is different. I mean, I have a different argument for that, but it is not the time for it. But okay, so what Casanova has been arguing could be applicable then to Cairo. That will take me to the other topic, which is more complicated a little, and it needs more details. But I'm not going to look at the paper and tell you what is what. It is better to continue this way so that you feel always attentive and so on. And at the same time, so that I don't lose my track and take all your time. So let us talk then about what is complicated in that issue. Now, all historians, especially the historians who wrote after, as you know, I mean, we don't have much written about the fall of Baghdad during its fall, with the exception of Fawati. that is Kitab al-Hawadith, it is called. That is, and al-Hawadith, it means this, events of great calamity or disaster, and so on. That is what he meant by it. And nobody, because it is a manuscript, and nobody could tell. Now, that book became very popular by its time. And its time. Later on, certainly historians began to talk about that, and so on and so on. Poets, even Hafiz al-Shirazi, will be writing about the fall of Baghdad, and so on and so on. Okay. The book industry then, let me go to two sides of that issue. The book industry then, around that time, a book like Al-Hawadith, you find it in very many versions, available everywhere. But no author is mentioned, no attribution, and so on. You find books which were written in not only in 700 copies, like for instance, Al-Hariri Maqamat, which we know, but we know also a record of copyists who are very rich simply because of the copying industry, meaning that it is not necessarily print that we are talking about. Copying itself has been very prosperous business, which means that there is a readership. The readership is no longer patronage only. I'm waiting for money to come to me from a prince or this guy or whatever. No, it comes from the public. This is why you publish that as you copy. You give it to a good copier, and the good copier usually will make very good money also, and so on. So that is a kind of a thriving industry, and copying was a thriving industry throughout the period we are talking about. Very important note, because the young generation, generally speaking, are accepting what Anderson, Partha Chatterjee, when I was talking one day and reviewing the book when it appeared, certainly, he said, well, but you missed the point. You didn't mention something about the print, because Anderson said the following. I told him, no. I wrote that in particular in response, without naming Anderson, that is a response to Anderson, that actually copying is the other side of the industry. We should understand the cultural industry as different, and production, I mean, is different from print, yes, but it has the same power. When you have a readership like that, you cannot claim anymore that only a print can make a book popular. I've mentioned to you, and I mentioned certainly many books which became very popular around that time. That is something. The other side, as I told you, of the thing of the Republic of Letters. Now, something here is Baghdad. It fell. The feeling itself among jurists and historians was enormous. That is, they lost. And to lose the center was very important to them. I mean, very important for the thinking that the universe is centered on the figure of the caliph. Despite historians didn't go into the fact, which mentioned by this book, Al-Fawati, that is a book on Hawadith, in which he said that actually the soldiers were not given their dues, salaries, that is payments, for more than 6 months. That the young caliph was playing with a young girl whom he loves at that time. Why were they? So you need to look at all the facts to understand that Baghdad and the power of the caliphate was already waning. I mean, it is already collapsing. For a century or two, it has been already. You need only somebody to push it. And that is what happened around that time, and so on. So that was a political failure, certainly, you might be saying that. But let us go to the issue itself. Now, here is a center which disappeared. You have other centers. Damascus was still there. Aleppo was still there. There are other centers, certainly, Isfahan and whatever, all in the Muslim East also are there. And so we have the Muslim West and the Muslim East. Both of them have very many centers. And the production is very much prosperous and thriving all over the Islamic land around that time. But we have problems, as I told you. These problems, for instance, how can we explain some figures? Okay, we assume that there are figures who have been very effective, powerful in building that Republic of Letters and giving it the name and so on, and thousands of names, actually, which we have. They cover everything, whether we are talking about the sciences, about philosophy, about literature, about rhetoric, about grammar, everything we are talking about, and so on. But at that time also, you have ambition. And around that time, Timur Lenk appeared. And Timur, and that is Tamerlane, whom Christopher Marlowe will be writing his play about, and so on, was there, very powerful, very ambitious, and here he is reaching Damascus. And actually he invaded Damascus. While he and his soldiers were outside the walls of Damascus, Damascus was already attacked, but the center was already was defended very strongly by some artisans and so on. We have the meeting, the surprising meeting between Ibn Khaldun and Timur, along with a number of Damascene theologians and so on. The sessions between Ibn Khaldun, the historian, the sociologue, I mean, everybody knows Ibn Khaldun, right? The sessions were 35 sessions over 48 days, between whom? Ibn Khaldun and Timur. What did they cover in that? According to Ibn Khaldun, that is the report of Ibn Khaldun himself, telling us that they discussed very many things. First of all, Ibn Khaldun saw in Timur the proof to his theory of solidarity. That is, solidarity, how is it possible for people to build a new empire? That is to say, how dynasties fall and how new ones will emerge, and so on. That kind of dialectic, which he explained in his Muqaddimah, as you know, to his history. That is one thing. So he is asking Timur about a few things, and he is noticing, and what they experience, and so on, and he saw that this is exactly the proof for his theory about the rise and fall. The other thing is he is telling us, he is not shying away from that, he is telling us that actually Timur asked him to prepare some material and maps and information about Morocco and the whole western flank of the Arab world, including Andalusia. And as you know, Ibn Khaldun was the administrator in Andalusia around that time, in Granada, and later on Morocco, and he is a Tunisian by origin, and so on, and settled in Cairo. And he was, as you know, the Maliki judge there. Okay. So Ibn Khaldun was providing him with all this information. Was Ibn Khaldun a culprit in this case? Why was he doing that? What is it exactly? Timur was planning to invade all these to Cairo, reaching Morocco, and maybe crossing to Spain and to Europe, generally speaking. What was happening around that time? Was he? No, he was not a culprit. He was only saving Damascus at that time because he thought that is the easiest way to make arrangements with Timur so that he won't invade. It will be done peaceful or something. Could be. He didn't say, he didn't tell us exactly what is what. What is the reason? Why was he so helpful to Timur around that time? You see, questions which are open for us and very important, unless we understand it and we go to culture again to help us to find another answer. And according to that answer, certainly, is provided for us not by Ibn Khaldun, by Ibn Arab Shah. Ibn Arab Shah was taken from Damascus when he was at the age of 12. So he was raised where? In Samarkand. And he began to learn other languages, Persian, Turkish, and so on, all automatic. Ibn Arab Shah, in his book about Timur, which is a very powerful book around that time, certainly, provides us with more information that actually what Timur would like to do is to outshine any other cultural center and to make Samarkand the center, not Cairo, not Baghdad, not Damascus. No, it should be Samarkand. This is why he brought Taftazani, he brought Sharif al-Jurjani, he brought this, he brought that, all these figures. And he began to have sessions and debates in front of him. And the debates were beautiful. And certainly, for instance, when he asked al-Jurjani, al-Sharif al-Jurjani and Taftazani, and they were very good friends, certainly, very warm friends, that to have a debate about something. And there is a translator to do that. And the monitors, the moderator who was assigned by Timur himself. Later on, Sharif al-Jurjani won. Well, everybody expected at that time that Taftazani would win because a very well-known figure. He had very many books behind him and so on and so on. But Timur said the following: he had an edge over Taftazani because he belongs to the family of the Prophet. Okay, is Timur playing religion with politics or no? It is actually, this is his belief. You see, I mean, there are very many openings which are left to us in that kind of Republic of Letters. Now, did Samarkand survive after Timur died, for instance? No. You see, usually for a center to be a very cultural, powerful center, it needs to have the dynamics which are self-generating in the city itself to make it as thriving as it should be. And you cannot, by force, for instance, and create that center. You cannot do it this way. You know, Samarkand was eclipsed. Later, very many other centers took over, and that's the end of the story. But not so with Baghdad, for instance, after the defeat, it survived. I mean, it didn't die, it lost a lot, that is quite true, but it came back and so on and so on. Cairo was not attacked. Damascus regained some of its power, but definitely it suffered also. Aleppo suffered. And so on. So that is one issue, but there is another. Here is an Islamic subject, like Hassan al-Wazzan, for instance. He was kidnapped, and later on, he was taken to Rome, and he was baptized at that time. As Louis Medici. And at that time, according to the name of the Pope at that time. And the Pope thought around that time of invading the North Africa. We are good on time so far? So North Africa, that is what he was preparing for. And he asked Hassan al-Wazzan to prepare a description of Africa. And he did the geography of Africa, a book which was very popular. And it was made available in very many versions. Actually, by the end of the 18th century, the book was given to the king in England, for instance. It was a gift, a beautiful gift, they thought, around that time. But it was certainly available before that time. But look at that. What can we say about what is happening right now? Was Hassan al-Wazzan then a traitor to his culture? Or what? It was part of what is going on around that time. You see what I mean? Some people try to apologize, that is for Hassan Wazan, saying that actually he did not do that. He was forced to do that. It was duress. And usually there is legitimacy for that thing because he died as a Muslim. How can we tell that he died as a Muslim anyway? You see, I mean, these are openings, these are gaps. But nevertheless, these gaps are very important to us, and there are very many, because they will lead us to the Republic of Letters. The Republic of Letters is not a straightforward case. It doesn't mean that everything is kind of in harmony. No. This harmony is very important in order to be creative. So it is only in this harmony that usually there will be very new currents and attitudes and more questions and so on. That is exactly what is happening. As I told you, Ibn Battuta, for instance, will provide you with another case. Here is a man who is not exactly a jurist, but nevertheless, he took that role. And everybody believed that he could be. This is why what his role in the Maldives, for instance, and so on, and so on. But nevertheless, as a traveler, he left us a very good amount of information about very many things, which if you go indeed and try to see exactly what they are, how informative, how important, you will be surprised how helpful they are to the medieval Islamic Republic of Letters. The medieval then, as a phrase, doesn't mean that the medieval Europe. We are talking about the period itself, from the 12th to the end of the 18th century. This is the pre-modern, as they call it, or the post-classical period in the history. This was not decadence. If you look back again and you see, well, what is decadent? If there is so much talk and so many debates, what is the problem with that? Why shouldn't I think the amount of material, because we are talking about compendiums, books, authored books, and so on. We are talking about glosses, we are talking about margins, we are talking about comments by one author about another book, and so on, and they continue in a genealogy of one sort or another. Every kind of author in the next age, for instance, or so, will be having his or her own comment on that and so on. And that had been continuing for a long time. Okay, continuing for a long time as such, it means we have that thriving kind of lecture around the culture around that time. And that is what makes life. Some traditional Orientalists, I think, were so intimidated by the amount of the material which was produced around that time. It's a huge amount of material. If you look what was produced around that time, not only in language, dictionaries, and so on and so on, but we are talking about compendiums, huge ones. Qalqashandi had 14, and so on. For instance, everybody has something. And Safadi had something, Ibn Hajj al-Hamawi has something, Iji has something, all of them. So authored, and they multi-volume kind of production. So intimidating material. You cannot read it all. You cannot. And this is why I refer to Yaroslav Stegevich in his lecture, which he gave at St. Andrews early on in his life when he began his own career, in which he said the problem with us Orientalists, and he counted himself around that time as an Orientalist, he said the problem with us, we don't read our material, the material which is supposedly to be our subject, we don't read it with love. It is as if it is a condition, as if we are asked, as if it is a job. And we need love for that in order to understand a language and to go very deep into its production. You need to have an amount of love for that and devotion. And that is, I think, what was missing. But when you look at that kind of production very carefully, you will see that it is very enjoyable material if you read it. and you go through one book or another and so on. So this is why I think the book raised very good responses, and I am thinking of writing a kind of sequel to that, because as you know, any book will also suggest something else to be taken care of for the future. I won't take more of your time, and I leave it to Professor Qutbuddin. Thank you.